Continuing on with story number 2. Do you know, gang, that Frankenstein, I made a whole video where I talked about, I made the analogy of our society to the House of Frankenstein. That was way back last summer. But Frankenstein, which I said back then, and I will repeat here now, it's one of my favorite novels. It's one of my favorite stories. There's so many good versions of the story. The 1931 classic, of course, with Boris Karloff. The 1957 Hammer version with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. There was a stage version of it done in the London Theatre in 2011 with Johnny Lee Miller and Benedict Cumberbatch. I believe that a video recording of that play is actually still on this godforsaken website that we call YouTube. If it is, I will link it in the description box below because it's a brilliant production. But Frankenstein, it's over 200 years old now. Mary Shelley wrote it in 1816. It was published in 1818, I believe. So it's over 200 years old. And even after 200 years, we are still so, I don't know anymore. We are either so stupid, or we are so arrogant, or we are a combination of the two that we do not even recognize what it is telling us in plain colloquial English. And that brings me to this story. This one was published in the New York Post, although it's been everywhere. Headline: Scientists create first human monkey embryo in controversial experiment. You heard that right. They created a monkey man, for lack of a better word, a literal monkey man. Doesn't matter that it was just an embryo. Okay? We've talked about before how life begins at the moment of conception, and to steal a line from Dr. Seuss, a person is a person no matter how small. So, doesn't matter that it was only the size of an embryo, they created a monkey man in their petri dishes. A conglomeration of American and Chinese scientists created this thing in California. Here is from the story. Researchers at the Salk Institute for Biological Studies in California have conducted a controversial experiment that entails growing human stem cells within a macaque monkey embryo. But the scientists aren't attempting to create a real-life monkey man. Instead, they say they are hoping to better understand cell communication at conception. As a result of their work, the researchers hope they can learn more about human development, disease progression, and drug therapies, and eventually nurture entire human organs into life, making organ transplants via brain-dead donors an obsolete procedure. Currently, there are over 107,000 patients on the waiting list for organs, 17 of whom die each day waiting for life-saving transplants, according to the U.S. Health Resources and Services Administration. And of course, we have to have this little, despite the need for more viable human tissues, many have called such research dangerous and unethical, fearing it could lead to the creation of a human, non-human species. In the lab, these embryos are called monkey-human chimeras and created in a petri dish. In other words, in vitro fertilization. The embryos are monitored during a 20-day period and have since been destroyed. Now, that in and of itself is a violation of international agreement. The 14-day agreement, which said that embryos created in a lab, which I would argue in and of itself is unethical, cannot be allowed to develop past 2 weeks, because after the 2-week period, then the people who are developing in the petri dishes, let's just call them what they are, okay? The human person who is developing in that petri dish starts to actually form what we would call physical human characteristics. You know, the skeleton, the cardiovascular system, the brain starts to develop, the organs, because then all the cells, which are multiplying like mad within this new human life, all the cells, then they actually start to get specific assigned duties. Okay, you guys are going to be the cells that make up the liver. You're going to be the heart. You're going to be the brain, right? You're going to be the neurons and everything. But even that, coincidentally, is being fought against. Scientists from around the world have actually signed an agreement saying that we need to get rid of the 14-day rule. And basically, we need to allow actual physical people or actual chimeras like this. We need to allow them to grow beyond 14 days. Again, for the purposes of knowing about diseases, for knowing about drug therapies, in order to have organs. Now think about that for a second, gang. The argument boils down to we need to create people, or we need to create human-animal hybrids, chimeras, which comes from the Greek monster that had the oh shoot, I'm gonna forget. It had the head of a goat, the head of a lion, and I think it had and I know it had the head of something else. It had 3 heads: the head of a lion, the head of a goat, and the head of something else. And its tail was actually a serpent, and it was killed by Bellerophon, who rode the Pegasus until I think he tried to ride it to Olympus, and the gods didn't take kindly to that, so Zeus smited him and took Pegasus and put it up in the stars, and that's how we get the constellation Pegasus, and that's your Greek mythology tidbit for the day. But the argument boils down to this. We have to be able to create either full-blown human beings, or we have to create these medical chimeras in order so that we can use them as guinea pigs for drug therapies, to understand about how diseases work, which, to my mind, would seem to indicate that these creatures, these either human persons or these hybrids, will be deliberately given diseases. And then all of these potential vaccines, all these potential remedies will then be given to them, whether they're inoculated with them, whether it's radiation treatment, who knows. But basically, they are going to be guinea pigs for that, and then they are going to be turned into a harvest field for organs. So what we're saying is that we need to create an entire substrata of either fully fledged human beings or medical chimeras so that we can harvest their organs and we can use them as guinea pigs. I mean, that's terrifying. I almost just want to end the video here because everything should automatically speak for itself. That this is not only unethical, but it is terrifying, because think of the mindset that you have to have, gang, in order to justify it. You have to have a completely utilitarian mindset where, okay, these people can be created in laboratories. We can create human beings in laboratories in order so that these other people, can live. They can have organ transplants or whatever. And that's where they try to get you. They try to pull at your heartstrings with stories of people who are waiting for transplants. But put that on the back burner for right now and think about the mindset. If the human person is just another stock animal, no different than a cow or a pig, and can be created in a laboratory for the sole purpose that his organs can be harvested to benefit someone else over here, then what does that do to human dignity? The idea that every person has intrinsic worth, that every person is a gravitational well for dignity, natural rights and duties, family and society. That goes completely out the window. And instead of biblical man made in the image of God, or even, instead of Enlightenment man, where man was, maybe sort of, created by this deistic creator, but then bestowed on with rationality. Not even, forget even about Darwinian man, a man who is basically just an animal. He rises up from the muck. But unlike all the other animals, he develops the capacity to reason. And we've talked about this before, right? Man has the ability to imagine. He has the ability to create. He has the ability to abstract. He has the ability to dream, to actively daydream, to think about the future, to create, invent, and not even just tools to make his life easier, but transcendental works of beauty, like a musical composition, a piece of art, a film, a book, a novel. That, in Darwinian terms, that's what separates man from everything else. It's not that man is made in the image of God and therefore man has reason bestowed upon him. No, man is just an animal who somehow, some way got this transcendental element into himself. How, we don't exactly know. The mindset that allows you to grow human beings or medical chimeras, does away with all of those models. Man isn't special because he's made in the image of God. Man isn't even special now because he is the only animal with reason. Man is just an animal. And he can be bred, he can be fattened, he can be harvested like any other animal. In fact, even less than animal, because as you know, there are very vocal and very noisy, and in some cases very influential animal rights groups who argue that a pig, a cow, a horse, a chicken has just as much human dignity and just as many natural rights and duties as you do. So what this means, if that's the case, this is where the contradiction comes in. If that's the case, of course, we can't breed animals, even ethically speaking. And I will be the first one to admit that modern day animal farms that actually breed animals like cows and pigs for the purposes of harvesting their milk or just harvesting them are, they're abominable. They are abominable, and it needs to be reformed now because it is literally animal cruelty, what many of these places actually do to their animals simply to provide cheap meat for our plates. It's terrible. I might have to make a whole video about that. But this is where the contradiction comes in. If an animal has as much dignity and worth and right as a human being, then they obviously can't be bred, they obviously can't be kept, and they obviously can't be eaten. But at the same time, man is so much lower than an animal that he can be harvested for his organs. People always say that you've lost the argument if you immediately make a comparison to the Third Reich, but this is literally Third Reich mentality, that there are people who are less than people, that there are lives who are unworthy of life. Again, gang, this stems from the fact that human life begins at conception, that a new human person is actually formed when the sperm meets the egg. So that's what's happening here. It's not just trying to clone an organ by itself. This is creating an entirely new person. Because the mentality, and this is where it gets scary, because if you make that assumption that this is okay, then like I said, that idea spreads out throughout the rest of society. And now man is just another animal. And so then what's actually protecting you isn't the understanding that you are a human person and therefore are something that stands apart from the rest of creation. You completely and entirely unique, both in terms of the rest of the plant and animal kingdom and the rest of humanity too, because each person is unique. Each person, you and I, will not be repeated. Unless, of course, they get our tissue sample somewhere and start cloning us. And, oh gosh, is that the stuff of science fiction novels? But if that's the case, then what is going to determine human dignity? What is going to determine human worth? Well, it's going to be materialistic means. Maybe, once you reach a certain financial level, you have more dignity than anyone else because, of course, you can buy protection. Maybe if you belong to this sector of the economy, or you belong to this union, or you belong to this group, maybe then you have more intrinsic dignity because you have more worth, right? Let's say an entertainer, a popular entertainer who draws millions and millions and millions of people into theaters, if we still have theaters, is worth more than the garbage collector, the garbage man, or the local cashier. And then what happens? The people who have less dignity and less worth, well, do we really even need to protect them? We don't even have to say, oh yeah, you can clonk them on the head and steal their organs if you need them. No sweat. No, it's just the fact that you are worth less. So society has less of will. Society has less will to protect you when you are wrong. Society has less will to make sure that we're actually following the common good so that you have a chance to flourish, because we recognize that you, Mr. Local Garbage Man or Mr. Local Cashier Man from the local grocery store, have just as much dignity and worth as, I don't know, Cardi B, let's say. We don't have to do that. It becomes the jungle comes into society. The jungle is transplanted into society. Instead of society acting as a buffer between us and raw, unadulterated nature, that comes and is planted here. So then the jungle actually comes back, where we have prey and we have predators. I mean, this is the mindset. You might think that I'm just spitballing and fear-mongering because of this story, but gang, again, ideas have consequences. As Richard Weaver wrote all the way back in 1948, ideas have consequences. And if this idea is actually normalized, because, oh my gosh, look what we're going to do. We're going to learn so much about diseases, and we're going to learn so much about their cures, and we're going to have organs galore so that people won't die. It won't matter. I'm going to say something that is going to be very, very controversial. Okay, but I don't really have a censor on anymore. My stint in YouTube jail, instead of actually cowing me, actually just made me say, to give the PG version of the famous line from Risky Business, sometimes you just got to say, what the hell, and do it. So I'm going to say this. It would be better if those 107,000 people waiting for organ transplants, right? It would be better if they died than if they actually got the transplant through this research and through this mentality, because then their lives won't be worth spit. I would rather have them die, but be recognized as actual, authentic, honest-to-God human beings, endowed with reason and a human spirit that separates them from the rest of creation, than to let them live in a society where they're just a meat sack, because there is nothing at all special about us, because now we can just be grown in petri dishes. Rather radical, you might say, but I stand by it. That is story number 2.